I heard my daughter-in-law tell the doctor to let nature finish her, and for a moment, I truly believed I had already died. But the monitor above my head was still beeping, stubborn and steady, as if refusing to let anyone decide for me. I lay there, unable to open my eyes fully, listening to voices that floated somewhere between the living and the fading, and all I could think was how strange it felt to still be here, when someone so close to me had already written me off. I had never imagined that the first person to sign my departure slip would be someone who married into the family, someone who barely knew the weight of my steps or the rhythm of my days. Yet there she was, speaking softly, firmly, as though she were granting mercy rather than betrayal. I felt the cold cuff tighten around my arm again, the machine hissing as it measured what little strength remained in me. The taste of metal lingered on my tongue, and every breath burned slightly on the way out. But it was the quiet, calculated tone in Emma's voice that cut deeper than any pain in my body. "If her heart stops," she said, "let it be." She wouldn't want interventions at her age. Strange, really, how confidently she spoke about my wishes. I had never once shared them with her. The doctor murmured something back, something about protocols, but he did not argue. They rarely argue with the ones who look healthy and speak clearly. I lay still, my body heavy as wet wool, but my mind sharp enough to understand. She wanted me to slip away. Quickly, quietly, without fuss. A practical solution to an inconvenient problem. For a moment, I wondered if my son was with her, if he nodded in agreement somewhere out of sight. I couldn't hear him, only Emma. Always Emma, filling the air with that polished certainty of hers. She believed she was doing the right thing. That was the worst part. Malice is easier to fight. Righteousness, far harder. My vision was a narrow slit of light, a blurred ceiling, a drifting shadow. I tried to move a finger, but it twitched only slightly. Still, that was enough to remind me that I was not gone yet. The beeping agreed with me, steady and patient. I had always been patient too, perhaps too much for my own good. 72 years teaches you how to wait, for people to change, for wounds to heal, for someone to finally say the words you hoped they'd say. But in this narrow bed, with Emma's voice deciding my fate, something inside me shifted, quiet, but certain. I would not wait for them to choose whether I lived. A nurse came closer. I recognized her perfume before I saw her silhouette. She adjusted my blanket gently, almost apologetically, as if she'd heard what Emma said too. Her hands were warm. That warmth reached deeper than her touch. It reminded me I still belonged to this side of the world. When the curtain rustled again, Emma leaned over me. Her face was elegant, composed, that same measured smile she always wore when she wanted to look kind in front of others. "Just rest, Margaret," she said, as if I were a child asking for something unreasonable. "You've had a long life. You don't have to fight anymore." Fight! She used the word so lightly, as though she knew what battles I'd fought, or how much fight was left in me. I wanted to tell her that I was not done, that my life was not a candle she could pinch out because it flickered. But the words sat in my throat like stones. She turned away, already finished with me. The doctor followed her out, their voices fading down the corridor. The monitor kept beeping in the quiet that settled afterward, slow and stubborn, not ready to yield. Neither was I. And as I lay there, gathering breath little by little, something in me steadied, a thought, a line I hadn't crossed in years. If they wanted nature to finish me, They would learn that nature is far more patient than they are. I was not going anywhere yet. When I finally managed to open my eyes fully, the room around me looked unfamiliar, though I had spent the whole night in it. Hospitals always had that way of erasing distinction, smoothing life into pale colors and soft beeping. Morning light seeped in through the blinds, warmer than I expected, and for a moment it felt almost kind. My body was still heavy, but the fog in my mind had thinned, and I could gather my thoughts one by one, like fallen pins from a sewing box. A nurse walked in, pushing a cart with quiet wheels. She was young, with tired eyes that still held some gentleness. "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," she said, checking the monitor. Her voice didn't assume anything of me, not weakness, not confusion. That alone made her presence comforting. I wanted to ask how long I'd been sleeping, but my throat felt scraped, reluctant to shape words. She noticed, handed me a small cup of water. "Slowly," she murmured. I sipped, and the water tasted like life returning. It was strange. Lying here so still when inside, I carried a storm no one else could hear. They all thought I was fragile enough to break under the weight of a breeze. Maybe that's why Emma spoke so openly beside me last night. Maybe that's why she believed my silence meant agreement. But silence can hide more than weakness. It can hide growing clarity. The nurse adjusted my pillows. "Your vitals are improving," she said. "You gave us quite a scare." Her eyes stayed on my face a moment longer, searching. I wondered if she'd been the one who heard Emma's request. Some people pretend not to hear cruelty. Others tuck it away in the corners of their eyebrows where their sympathy shows. When she left, the room returned to its steady quiet. I could hear someone coughing in the hallway, the hum of a rolling bed, distant footsteps of a doctor making rounds. All these small sounds made me feel strangely grounded. I had not disappeared. My existence registered here, on machines, in charts, in the eyes of strangers who'd never claimed to love me. I turned my head slowly toward the small table where someone had placed a plastic pitcher of water and a tissue box. No flowers, no cards. Not that I expected any. My son rarely thought of such things, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. A habit of assuming I would always be there, quietly, reliably, uncomplaining. A background figure in his busy life. Emma, on the other hand, I had no illusions. Her frostiness had begun long before this hospital stay. It started with small comments, always phrased politely enough to pass as concern. "Maybe it's time you considered a smaller place, Margaret. You shouldn't strain yourself with bills. It's not safe for you to live alone." Each sentence carried an invisible suitcase of intentions. I had pretended not to see it. Pretending is a skill you acquire with age, though it costs more than honesty. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. A different nurse entered, older, brisk, but not unkind. She checked my chart, took my temperature, then looked at me thoughtfully. "Your daughter-in-law was here last night," she said, very anxious. The choice of words made me smile inside. Anxiety can wear many masks: concern, irritation, impatience. I managed to whisper, "My son?" She hesitated just slightly. "He hasn't been in yet this morning, but he's on the list of primary contacts. I'm sure he'll stop by later." Later. Such an elastic word. It can stretch for hours, days, years. When she left, I watched the strip of light on the wall move slowly as the sun shifted outside. My body ached, but not unbearably. Pain was familiar. Betrayal still had edges too sharp to hold. Yet beneath the hurt was something steadier. something forming with deliberate calm, resolve, not loud or dramatic, just a quiet tightening of thread inside me. I was still alive. I was still here, and I had heard everything. As I breathed in, deeper than before, I felt the shape of the decision that would soon come. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't anger. It was something far simpler, dignity returning home after being gone too long. I closed my eyes not to sleep, but to listen, to my breath, to the monitor, to the truth settling in like a long-awaited guest. One thing was certain. Emma had made a mistake last night. She believed that because I was silent, I was powerless. She had forgotten that even the quietest women remember everything. I heard the door open before I saw her. Even without looking, I knew it was Emma. The sharp click of her heels always arrived before the rest of her. The rhythm of her steps was brisk, purposeful, as if she were entering a boardroom rather than a hospital room where her husband's mother lay recovering. I kept my eyes half closed, letting my breath slow just a little, not to deceive, but to observe. People reveal more when they think you're weak. Margaret? Her voice floated toward me, light and sweet on the surface, like tea with too much sugar to hide its bitterness. Are you awake? I blinked slowly, giving her the kind of response she preferred, a minimal one, requiring no real effort from her. She moved closer, and I could feel the faint scent of her perfume, crisp and cool, never warm. She always chose fragrances like that, as if softness might betray something she didn't want seen. Well, you look better, she said, but her tone was the kind used when someone comments on weather they don't care for. The doctor said your vitals stabilized overnight. That's good. Really good. She nodded to herself, though her eyes didn't match the nod. She adjusted the edge of the blanket near my arm, not out of care, but because she liked things to look tidy, even illness. Her hands were cool, controlled, precise. I wondered if she remembered touching me even a second after doing it. I told Andrew we should wait until you're stronger before discussing anything important, she continued. Stress isn't good for your heart. The irony made the corners of my mouth twitch. Stress, for her, meant any conversation where she didn't get to decide the outcome. She pulled a chair a little too close to the bed and sat, crossing her legs with the smooth elegance she'd always been proud of. You scared all of us, you know, collapsing like that. Her voice lowered, carefully measured. You were alone in the house again, weren't you? I've been telling Andrew it isn't safe. You need more structured support. Structured support, a polite way to say, somewhere they could keep an eye on my belongings, my papers, my home. I swallowed, still letting silence fill the space between us. Silence makes impatient people uncomfortable. With Emma, it made her talk more, revealing pieces she normally kept tucked away. She smoothed her skirt, another sign she was working herself up to something. The doctor asked yesterday if you had any advance directives. I told him Andrew would handle everything. Of course we want what's best for you. What's best for me? How easily she used that phrase. As if her vision of my future held any tenderness. As if she had spent even a moment trying to imagine what I might want instead of what made life simpler for her. She leaned forward slightly. The thing is, situations like this remind us how unpredictable life can be, and we all want to make sure everything is in order. A pause, deliberate. Your house, your accounts. None of us would want complications if something happened. There it was, finally stepping into the light. I kept my face as still as the sheets beneath me, not out of fear, out of clarity. If Emma thought I was too weak to understand, she'd keep talking. And she did. Andrew worries, she went on. He may not say it, but he does. He feels responsible. You've lived alone too long, Margaret, and you have too much on your plate at your age. Bills, taxes, maintenance, it's a lot. We don't want you to be overwhelmed. I remembered the sound of her voice the night before. Let nature finish her. And wondered how she could sit beside me now with that same careful smile. But I said nothing. I let her fill the room with her justifications. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Thin, neat, labeled with my name. I brought these forms, just practical things. We can look at them later, when you feel up to it. Power of attorney, health directives, property planning. Nothing urgent. Nothing urgent. Yet she carried the forms with her to the hospital at dawn. She placed the folder on my bedside table, tapping it lightly with manicured nails. We're only thinking of your comfort, Margaret. That's all. For a moment, she looked at me closely, as if trying to read whether any of this was landing the way she hoped. I kept my gaze soft, unfocused. An old woman recovering from a medical scare, harmless, malleable, not worth being wary of. She exhaled with satisfaction. I'll come back later, she said, standing. Try to rest. You need your strength. She walked to the door, her heels clicking out a polished farewell. And just before leaving, she added, We'll all feel better once everything is settled. When the door closed behind her, the room felt larger, as if her shadow had been taking up too much space. The air was cooler, too, gentler. I lifted my eyes to the folder on the table. Settled. I breathed in slowly, letting the quiet settle around me on my own terms. Emma thought she had seen all of me. An aging woman, a fading one. Someone who would accept her decisions without question. She had forgotten something essential. I am old, yes. But I am not done. I heard Andrew long before he entered the room. My son never learned how to walk quietly. His steps always carried a sort of restless energy, as if he were in a hurry to leave any place he entered. Even when he was a child, he couldn't stay still. Shoes tapping against the floor, fingers drumming on the table, eyes already drifting toward the next thing he wanted to do. Some habits never soften with age. Mom? His voice came from the doorway, careful and bright. The way people speak to someone they're not sure will answer. I turned my head slightly, enough to let him know I was awake. He came closer, and for a moment I could study him without needing to respond. His face drawn, a crease between his brows, that familiar mix of guilt and impatience tightening his mouth. He looked older than his 45 years, but stress ages people faster than birthdays do. You scared us, he said, pulling up the chair Emma had used earlier. The doctor said it was a pretty serious drop in blood pressure, and the pain. Mom, why didn't you call sooner? His voice trembled almost convincingly. I managed, I whispered. Speaking was easier than yesterday, though my throat still felt fragile. He nodded, relieved by the sound of my voice, as if my ability to respond made this visit simpler for him. He reached for my hand, squeezed it lightly, and I wondered whether he felt the tremor in my fingers. He used to hold my hand with certainty, the way sons do when they still believe their mothers are unbreakable. Now he held it like a responsibility. We need to make sure you're not alone so much, he continued. It's getting harder for you, Mom, and I can't always get away from work. Emma is juggling everything too. We just want you safe. His words fell into the room gently, but the edges were sharp. I blinked slowly. "You're both busy," I murmured. He leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck the way he did when conversations drifted toward things he preferred to avoid. "Busy, yes, but also realistic. The house is too much for you. The bills, the repairs." He glanced at the folder Emma had left on the table. He tried to hide the glance, but I noticed. "We've been thinking maybe it's time to simplify things. For everyone." Simplify. Another polished word. People like Emma loved hiding decisions inside delicate phrases. Andrew, though, his tone was less practiced. He still stumbled around the truth, still tried to soften it for both our sakes. "I mean," he continued, clearing his throat, "if something happened, God forbid, we'd be scrambling. Your documents are all over the place, Mom. Your insurance, the deed, the investments. Emma said we should at least help you organize everything." The way he said Emma, leaning on her judgment, not his own, told me more than he intended. He glanced again at the folder, his knee bouncing with that nervous rhythm he'd never outgrown. He hesitated, then added, "We just don't want complications later." Later. The same later the nurse had used. The same later Emma wrapped around every sentence like a lace ribbon hiding the rope beneath. He talked for a while about logistics, safety, responsibility. Words that sounded like care if you didn't listen too closely. But I was listening closely. Closer than he realized. He never once mentioned what I wanted. Only what would ease the burden on him and the woman who hoped nature would finish me. At last he sighed, as if he'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. "Mom, I need to ask." He paused, then spoke with that earnestness he used whenever he wanted something. "Do you have a will? Something formal? We've never discussed it." A soft ache spread through my chest. Not from illness, but from the memory of a lifetime in which he had never asked what I needed, yet always found a way to ask what he needed from me. I did not flinch. I did not show anger. Anger wastes too much precious oxygen. Instead, I let my voice come out as a whisper. "Why now?" He blinked quickly, startled by the question. "Because of what happened," he said. "Because this episode made us realize how fragile things are. We just want to prepare. That's all." The beeping of the monitor filled the silence that fell between us. I watched him fidget, adjusting his cuffs, avoiding my eyes. Guilt flickered across his face, faint but present, like a lamp left on in an empty room. I thought of Emma's words from last night. Let nature finish her. And now here was my son, talking about wills and documents before I could even sit up properly. Perhaps he didn't know what she'd told the doctor. Perhaps he did. Either way, they were aligned in their plans, if not in their methods. When Andrew finally stood to leave, he squeezed my shoulder gently. "We'll handle everything, Mom. You just focus on getting better." He meant it as comfort, but all I felt was the shape of a truth I had tried to ignore for too long. They wanted control over my future, and they assumed I had none. As the door closed behind him, I let my eyes drift to the folder again, smooth, thin, insistent. Everything, it seemed, was beginning to come into focus. The morning air in the room felt cooler, almost sharp, as if reminding me I was still alive enough to feel discomfort. A tray with untouched breakfast sat near my bed, oatmeal turning stiff, tea losing its warmth. I stared at it without hunger. Instead, My eyes drifted to the few belongings the nurses had placed on the narrow shelf beside me. Small things, but each one carried a weight heavier than its size. My glasses lay crookedly on top of my handbag, the left arm slightly bent. I remembered bending them myself last week while tightening a screw in the kitchen cabinet. I had told no one. Not because there was no one to tell, but because I'd grown used to solving my own small battles quietly. The bent glasses now looked like a tiny record of that solitude, one no doctor needed to diagnose. Next to them lay my watch. The strap was worn, thinning where the clasp always pressed against my wrist. The watch still worked, ticking faithfully even as my heartbeat had faltered. I lifted it slowly, feeling the faint vibration of its tiny engine. I used to check it constantly, timing my day around chores, meals, small errands. Lately, time had felt like something slipping away unnoticed, thinning like the strap itself. On the shelf was also a folded cardigan the nurse had found in the ambulance. Soft wool, pale gray. I'd knitted it the winter after my husband died. The year's silence began to live in my house like an uninvited tenant. I had worn it nearly every day for comfort. Funny how you don't realize a thing has become part of you until you see it removed, folded neatly, waiting for your return. The curtain moved slightly from the draft. Outside the window, clouds thickened over the parking lot. Cars came and went. People lived their lives, rushed to appointments, argued, laughed. I felt somehow outside of that world, suspended between what was and what might be. I looked at my hands resting on the blanket. The skin had thinned over the years, showing the pale blue of veins beneath. They were still strong enough, though. Strong enough to lift, to hold, to choose. For so long, I had used these hands for other people. Meals cooked, bills paid, favors done, small acts of care unnoticed or forgotten. I had never resented it. Love doesn't feel like sacrifice until the balance breaks. On the bedside table, half tucked beneath a hospital brochure, lay the papers Emma had brought. I didn't touch them. The edges peeking out were enough to read the words printed in bold: authorization, transfer, durable power of attorney. They sat there like vultures, waiting for the right moment to descend. The quiet in the room deepened, not empty, but full. Full of realizations that had been circling unspoken for years. I had allowed too much. I had forgiven too easily. I had believed that love, even when poorly expressed, still bore good intentions. But last night's words had shattered that comforting illusion. Let nature finish her. As if I were a project abandoned halfway. As if my life were a loose thread worth snipping. The beeping monitor pulled my attention back to the present, its steady rhythm a gentle defiance. That sound, soft, persistent, felt more loyal than the voices that should have protected me. I took a slow breath, deeper than before. My ribs ached from the effort, but the ache felt almost cleansing. Each inhale gave shape to a thought. Each exhale cleared space for resolve. There was no anger rising in me, no dramatic swell of indignation, just a steady settling, like dust finding its place. I was not done. I had more say in my life than they imagined, and the quiet inside me was no longer submission. It was preparation. By late afternoon, the light in the room had shifted to a pale gold, as if the sun were trying to slip in quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone's suffering. I lay propped slightly higher than before, the pillows arranged by a nurse who seemed to understand comfort better than most people in my own family. My body still felt fragile. but my mind had sharpened into something clear, almost cold. Clarity is strange at this age. It comes not with fire, but with a steady, deliberate calm. I heard the soft murmur of voices outside my door. One belonged to the doctor, the other unmistakably to Emma. Even through the wall, her tone carried that familiar firmness, the sound of a person who believed her judgment trumped everyone else's. I closed my eyes, not out of fear, but to listen better. Her condition is stable, the doctor said. We'll continue monitoring, but overall she appears to be improving. A pause. Then Emma's voice, lowered but still crisp. Yes, but we all know how unpredictable these situations are at her age. We shouldn't force anything unnatural. Unnatural? Strange word to use for trying to keep someone alive? The doctor offered a diplomatic hum. Our priority is her recovery. And ours, Emma interrupted gently, is her dignity. She spoke often about not wanting extreme interventions, especially if her heart fails. You understand? The doctor hesitated. I felt it rather than heard it. Legally, he said, I need clear directives from the patient herself unless we have documentation. Emma pressed on. She's tired. She's been declining for a while. Andrew and I can help with those decisions. Help, she said, as if deciding how I should die were an act of generosity. I opened my eyes and turned my head toward the door. Shadows rippled against the curtain. Their conversation felt like a slow tightening of a rope, each word meant to pull choice out of my hands. My pulse stayed steady, not from indifference, but from something deeper. I had lived through storms harsher than this, and none had taken my will from me. The doctor eventually entered. He smiled politely, professionally, but I could see something guarded in his eyes. Hesitation, perhaps. Emma followed a moment later, her smile perfectly arranged, as if she had rehearsed it in the hallway. Margaret, the doctor said, we want to make sure your care reflects your wishes. Do you have any advance directives? A written plan? Before I could answer, Emma stepped closer. Doctor, she really shouldn't worry about paperwork right now. Stress will only... I lifted my hand, slowly but deliberately. The small motion was enough to stop both of them. I can speak for myself, I said, my voice thin but steady. Emma froze, the smile still on her mouth but no longer fitting her face. The doctor nodded. Of course, Mrs. Holloway. I have no directives, I continued, and I want full care, whatever is necessary. Emma tried to interrupt. Margaret, you may not understand the... I understand perfectly. My gaze did not move from hers. And I am not done making decisions. For a moment, she simply stared at me, stunned into silence. She had built her plans on the belief that I would remain quiet, that weakness meant compliance. But there is strength in stillness, too, if one chooses to use it. The doctor cleared his throat gently. Very well. We'll proceed accordingly. Emma forced a smile, but her fingers tightened around her handbag, the knuckles whitening. I watched her, not with anger, but with a growing steadiness. She had expected me to drift away quietly, like a candle burning down to its final inch. Instead, she found a flame she could not snuff out with a sentence. After the doctor left, she remained by the foot of the bed, adjusting her composure like someone tugging a wrinkled dress into place. You shouldn't exert yourself, she said softly. There's no need to make this harder. Harder for whom, I wondered. I let the silence answer for me. Silence, when used with intention, becomes a boundary. She lingered a moment longer, then turned to go, her steps more rigid than when she'd arrived. When the door closed behind her, the room felt lighter, the air clearer. Something inside me had shifted, not loudly, but decisively. I had spoken only a few words, yet they carried the weight of a choice I had not made in years, a choice to stand for myself, even from a bed. The monitor beside me beeped on, steady and patient, as if agreeing with the decision. I was not finished, and I would not let anyone finish me. Night in a hospital has its own sound. Not silence exactly, but a softened world. Distant carts rolling, muted conversations at the nurse's station, someone coughing down the hall. I lay awake, not from pain, but from a sense that something had shifted inside me and refused to let me rest. Once, I would have waited for Andrew to reassure me, or for Emma to explain things in her polished way. Now, I trusted neither of them to tell me the truth. If I wanted clarity, I would have to reach for it myself. A young nurse, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, entered to check my vitals. Her badge said, Sarah. She moved quickly but not carelessly, adjusting the wires with gentle fingers. When she finished, she smiled at me as if she could sense I was more awake than I let on. Need anything? She whispered. Her kindness made something inside me unclench. Water, I murmured. And a question answered. She brought the cup first, then sat on the edge of the chair beside my bed, as if she knew I wasn't asking for painkillers or more blankets. What's on your mind? I studied her face for a moment. Not because I doubted her. Rather, I needed to be sure she was one of those people who listened with both ears and conscience. My daughter-in-law, I began slowly, spoke with the doctor yesterday about letting certain things happen naturally. Her expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. She kept her voice neutral, but the truth flickered in her eyes before she spoke. I wasn't part of that conversation, but yes, some concerns were brought up by your family. She leaned forward. But you're alert, oriented, and able to make your own medical decisions. We respect that. Your word stands. That's not what worries me, I said softly. I want to know whether they've tried to access my records, insurance, financial files, anything outside medicine. She hesitated, not because she wanted to hide something, but because she was deciding how honest she was allowed to be. We document every request, she said carefully, and I can check who's been listed as a contact or proxy. Please, I whispered. I need to know. She nodded once, then slipped out of the room. I stared at the ceiling while I waited, tracing the lines in the plaster. I wondered how long Andrew had been preparing the ground, nudging here, suggesting there, until the idea of managing my affairs felt natural to him. Or maybe Emma planted the seed and he simply watered it out of habit. When Sarah returned, her expression confirmed more than her words would. She closed the door quietly before speaking. Your daughter-in-law asked about insurance coordination, she said, and she requested information about your existing directives. We didn't give her any because she isn't listed as having that authority. I nodded slowly. It was what I expected. Yet hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a cold cloth pressed against my heart. There's more, she continued. Your son asked about points of contact with your primary physician and whether certain authorizations could be transferred. He didn't phrase it in a suspicious way, but it raised flags. My fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. I see. I'm telling you this, Sarah said gently, because you have the right to know who is trying to make decisions on your behalf. and because your doctor has formally noted your capacity to make your own choices. Thank you, I said, and my voice steadied. I don't want them involved in my care decisions from this point forward. She nodded again, a little more firmly. We can make that note explicit. Then she added softer. We see these situations sometimes. Family members mean well or believe they do. But it's your life. You get to choose. I let that settle inside me, not as comfort, but as confirmation. For the first time in a long while, someone was saying exactly what I needed to hear, not wrapped in duty or expectation, not softened for convenience. After she left, I lifted my watch from the bedside table. Its ticking seemed louder now, deliberate. Every second it measured was mine, not Andrew's, not Emma's. Mine. Outside, a cleaning cart rolled past, the wheels squeaking faintly. I listened to it move down the hall, and with each sound, something inside me steadied further. The fear that had clung to me these past 2 days loosened its grip, replaced by something older and stronger. Something I'd nearly forgotten I possessed. Resolve? I would recover. And when I did, I wouldn't return to the life they had planned for me. My life was still mine, and I was ready to reclaim every inch of it. By the next afternoon, the sky outside my window had turned a dull gray, as if the weather itself were echoing the heaviness settling in my chest. I wasn't weaker. If anything, my body felt slightly steadier. But the fatigue around my ribs had grown, like a reminder that I wasn't invincible. Still, I stayed propped up, alert, listening for every footstep in the hall. Emma arrived just past 3. Her knock was polite, but unnecessary. She never waited for permission. She walked in with the same bright expression she wore when greeting neighbors, pleasant, practiced, hollow. "Oh, good. You're awake," she said, setting her handbag on the windowsill as though she owned the place. "I wanted to check on you before my meeting." I nodded faintly, and she took it as an invitation to continue. She moved around the room, straightening things that didn't need straightening. A brochure, my water cup, the edge of my blanket. It was the kind of fussing people mistake for care. "The doctor said you're improving," she went on. "That's wonderful news. Andrew will be relieved. He's so overwhelmed with work lately." Her tone made it sound like my survival was an inconvenience added to his schedule. She smoothed her skirt, then leaned closer, lowering her voice as if about to share something intimate, not with me, but about me. "I spoke with the insurance coordinator this morning," she said, "just to make sure everything is aligned for your ongoing needs." I let my breath stay slow, steady. She continued, unaware or unwilling to believe that I understood every word perfectly. "You know how these things work, Margaret. If your condition worsens, treatments get expensive very quickly. We just want to avoid unnecessary strain." She put a careful emphasis on unnecessary, as though the cost of my existence were something to be measured like a grocery bill. "And of course," she added lightly, "your policy only covers certain interventions. If we know the limits now, we can make responsible choices before anything unexpected happens." There it was again, that gentle push toward the edge she hoped I'd quietly fall from. I studied her face. Not cruel, not angry, simply calculating. She believed she was being practical, even noble. That made her choices far more dangerous than malice ever could. She reached for the folder she'd brought earlier. "Everything's so much easier when paperwork is clear. Andrew agrees. He says we can help you sort it all out before you go home." Before I go home. Her voice blossomed with satisfaction. on that last word. Because to her, home was not where I lived. It was a resource waiting to be reassigned. She sat down, crossing her legs gracefully. You've done so much on your own for so long. It's admirable, really. But there comes a time when it's better to let others take over. You've earned that rest. I felt a quiet warmth rise in my chest. Not anger, but understanding. A clarity that settled with the weight of truth. She wasn't preparing to support me. She was preparing to replace me. Emma misread my silence as agreement. She patted my hand as if sealing the matter. We'll make sure everything transitions smoothly. Transitions. Another word that meant more to her than she dared to say aloud. She stood to leave, smoothing her blouse, checking her reflection in the darkened window. You focus on healing, she said brightly. Let us handle the complicated stuff. But when she stepped out of the room, closing the door behind her, the air shifted. Not heavier, cleaner. The way a room feels after someone blows out a candle, leaving only smoke behind. I stared at the folder she expected me to sign, and for the first time, I felt something sharper than resolve, steadier than fear. Awareness. They weren't planning for my recovery. They were preparing for my absence. And that meant I had no time left to remain quiet. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, long before the hallway lights brightened and the nurses began their rounds. My body still felt fragile, but it no longer frightened me. Weakness was familiar. Dependence was not. That, I realized, was the part I could no longer accept. Not from my son, and certainly not from the woman who hoped I would quietly disappear. I sat slightly higher in the bed, working slowly against the stiffness in my ribs. A small act, but one that made the room feel different. Mine, in a way it hadn't since the ambulance first brought me here. When Sarah, the night nurse, came for her final check before shift change, I caught her attention with a quiet, "Would you help me with something?" She looked at me with curiosity rather than surprise. Perhaps she had already sensed that the silence around me was shifting. "I'd like to speak with a social worker," I said. "Privately." The way her expression softened told me she understood more than I had said aloud. "Of course," she replied. "I'll put in the request right now." She left and I waited, listening to the gradual awakening of the ward. Carts moved, voices stirred. Someone down the hall groaned in pain. All of it reminded me that life, messy, persistent, was still happening around me. I was part of it, not an afterthought in someone else's plan. By mid-morning, a soft knock sounded, and a woman stepped inside, holding a slim tablet and a kind, professional smile. Her badge read, Maria, Clinical Social Services. "Mrs. Holloway, I hear you wanted to talk." Her voice held no assumptions, no rush. It was the first conversation in days where I didn't feel managed. "Yes," I said. "Please sit." She pulled up the chair Emma had used, but unlike Emma, she didn't place herself too close. She gave me space, as if waiting for me to decide how much of it I needed. "How can I help you?" she asked. I took a breath, steady as I could. "I want to understand my rights. Medical, legal. Who can access what? Who cannot?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not from shock, but recognition. She had heard versions of this question many times before. "Has someone been trying to make decisions for you without your consent?" "Not directly," I said. "But indirectly, yes. And I want to be prepared." Maria nodded with a slow seriousness that made me trust her instantly. She opened her tablet. "You're mentally competent. Your chart notes confirm that." You have full authority over your care. No one, family or otherwise, can override your choices unless you've signed documents giving them that power. And if someone asks for that power, then it's up to you, she said. But nothing is transferred without your signature, and you can revoke permissions at any time. The relief I felt was not warmth, it was sturdiness, like the ground settling under my feet after shifting too long. I'd like to review my emergency contacts, I said, and update permissions. Of course. She turned the screen toward me. Right now, your son is listed as primary. Your daughter-in-law has no direct privileges, but she's noted as family support. Family support. The phrase tasted bitter. I want to remove her from the list entirely. Maria nodded without hesitation. Done. And your son? I paused. My heart didn't ache the way I expected. It felt quiet, resigned. He may remain, I said slowly, but with limited access. Updates only. No decision-making authority. Understood. As she typed, I watched the lines of text change. Small adjustments to a digital file, yet monumental shifts in my life. No arguments, no guilt, no manipulation. Just my choices, finally given space to breathe. When she finished, she looked up. Is there anything else you'd like? Yes. I felt my voice deepen with resolve. I need information on legal support, estate planning, protection of assets. The words felt strange on my tongue, strong, deliberate, but not out of place. Maria's smile warmed. I can put you in touch with our legal liaison. Many patients need guidance when families overstep. Overstep. A gentle word for something far more damaging. She stood, but before leaving, she added softly, You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Holloway. When the door closed behind her, I let myself inhale slowly. Not triumph, just clarity settling deeper. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't letting others arrange my life like furniture in a room they didn't live in. I was beginning to rearrange it myself. And this was only the start. They arrived together, just as I suspected they would. Andrew with his hurried steps and furrowed brow. Emma with her polished calm that never quite masked the impatience beneath it. I heard them before they entered, their conversation low but urgent, like people preparing for an uncomfortable task they believed was necessary. When the door swung open, Emma carried that impeccable smile she used on strangers she meant to impress. Andrew looked tired, but not in the way illness makes a son tired. Rather in the way an overworked man grows weary when life demands more attention than he wants to give. Mom, he said softly, how are you feeling? Better, I answered, my voice steady. Much better. Emma stepped closer. We're glad to hear that. Really. Her tone suggested relief mixed with something else, something strained. We thought this would be a good moment to talk through a few things. Practical things. There was that word again, practical, a word that had become their shield. I watched them settle themselves, Andrew dragging the chair near my bed, Emma standing beside him like a shadow. She placed the folder, the same one she'd brought before, on the tray table between us, as if presenting evidence. Mom, Andrew began, we're worried about you living alone, especially after this episode. It's time to make plans, and make them together. Emma nodded encouragingly, though her eyes stayed focused on the folder. We've looked into some wonderful assisted living options, safe, structured places. You'd have people around you all the time, activities, meals prepared, no stress. I felt a faint warmth rise in my chest, not anger, simply a quiet recognition of the truth behind their words. They weren't suggesting company, they were suggesting containment. Andrew reached for my hand, his palm warm and trembling slightly. It's not that we don't want you at home. It's just, the house is big, hard to maintain, and the bills. There's no need to continue, I said softly but firmly. His mouth closed. Emma straightened. I looked at both of them, taking my time. You're speaking as though decisions have already been made, as though I've handed that responsibility to you. Mom, Andrew sighed, we're trying to help. I know what help looks like, I said. And what control looks like? Emma's face tightened just enough to reveal a fracture in her composure. We're thinking of your safety. And I'm thinking of my dignity. There was a pause. Not long, but deep. They exchanged a quick glance. One of those silent marital conversations that lasts a second, but says everything. I continued. I've spoken with the hospital social worker. I've updated my permissions. From now on, all decisions regarding my care come directly from me. Emma's lips parted slightly. But Margaret. No, I said gently. No more paperwork from you. No more forms. No more plans made behind my back or beside my bed. Andrew leaned forward, his voice tight. You're misunderstanding. We're trying to make things easier. For whom? I asked. He didn't answer. Emma stepped in, her tone sugar-coated with urgency. We're just asking you to trust us. We only want what's best. And I want simple respect, I said. Yet you both spoke to the doctor about limiting interventions. You planned for a future without me while I was still here. A silence fell heavy between us, not hostile, just final. I straightened slightly, feeling every breath deepen my resolve. I will decide where I live. I will decide how my affairs are handled, and I will not sign anything you've brought. Andrew's shoulders sagged, a soft exhale escaping him. I wondered if it was disappointment, or merely the collapse of convenience. Emma was less subtle. Her expression tightened with the slightest flicker of frustration before she smoothed it away. We should give her time, she whispered to Andrew, though she meant for me to hear. Yes, I said quietly. You should. They stood, uncertain, as if the room's center of gravity had shifted. For years I had softened every edge for them. Today I did not. They left with carefully measured politeness, but when the door closed behind them, the air felt clearer, as though I had finally opened a window that had been stuck shut for years. I rested my hands on the blanket, letting the quiet return. Not emptiness. Freedom. The legal liaison arrived just after noon, announced by a soft knock and a brief introduction from a nurse. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a briefcase that looked older than both of us combined. His badge read, Attorney Consultant, J. Klein. He walked in with the calm presence of someone who had seen far too many families unravel inside hospital rooms and learned to speak gently while helping people gather the pieces. Mrs. Holloway, he said, approaching my bed. I understand you wanted information about protecting your personal and financial boundaries. I appreciated that he didn't use words like estate or planning or end of life. People like Emma loved those phrases. This man did not. Yes, I replied. Please sit. He placed his briefcase on the chair beside him, opened it with deliberate care, and pulled out a folder, not thick, but substantial. Papers that held weight not because of their size, but because of their purpose. Before we discuss documents, he began, I want to hear from you directly. What concerns brought you to request this meeting? I looked at my hands for a moment, tracing the fine blue lines beneath the skin, searching for the right words. My family, I said softly, has begun speaking about my affairs as though I am already gone. They mean to take control of decisions that should still be mine. He nodded slowly, not surprised. Unfortunately, that is common, and the law is very clear. You remain in full authority unless you assign that authority to someone else. Have you signed anything in recent years that would give your son or daughter-in-law power of attorney? No. Nothing. Good. He leaned slightly closer. Then you still hold complete control. And if you want to formalize boundaries, we can do that. What kind of boundaries? I asked. He pulled several papers forward, laying them in a neat row on his lap. A revocation of informal decision-making privileges, a declaration of independent medical authority, and if you wish, the beginnings of a trust, something that protects your home and assets from being redirected without your explicit instruction. The word trust seemed almost foreign in the air of this small room, solid, structured, the opposite of the shifting ground I'd been standing on for days. And this would prevent them from accessing anything without my permission? I asked. It would prevent anyone from doing so, he said quietly. Your estate would be safeguarded. Your decisions would stand. And if you choose, you can appoint an independent trustee, someone outside your family circle. I let the thought sit with me. My house, my accounts, my future. No longer potential leverage in someone else's plans. I want that, I said. All of it. He didn't react with surprise. Just a gentle nod, as if he had expected the moment when resolve would overtake hesitation. We can begin today, he said. It will require signatures, and later, when you are discharged, we'll finalize the trust with a full meeting. But the protections can be set in motion now. For the first time in days, I felt something open in my chest. Not relief exactly, but breath. A full, steady breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. He set the documents on the rolling tray table, adjusting it so I could see clearly. His movements were unhurried, respectful, as though these papers were something sacred, not because of their content, but because of what they represented. A nurse entered briefly with pain medication, saw the attorney, and smiled knowingly. Take your time, she whispered to me. Don't let anyone rush you. Her words echoed warmly inside me. When she left, Mr. Klein continued, I want you to read these slowly. Ask questions. This is about your strength, not your surrender. I picked up the pen he offered, simple, black, weighty, in a way that felt symbolic. My hand trembled slightly, but not from weakness, from certainty. For years I had built my life around helping others, supporting, smoothing, giving. It had never occurred to me that the quietest fight I'd ever face would happen in a hospital bed. But here I was, and I was choosing my future myself. Mr. Klein waited patiently as I signed the first page. My name steady, sure. With each signature, something small but profound shifted inside me. I was no longer the woman Emma could dismiss with a whisper. No longer the mother Andrew assumed would yield. I was myself again, fully, decisively, and I was not finished yet. Emma arrived before Andrew this time. Her heels struck the floor with more force than usual, the sound of a woman who felt her control slipping and was desperate to reassert it. She didn't bother knocking, simply walked in and closed the door behind her with a care that did not match the sharpness in her eyes. I heard you met with a legal liaison, she said, not even attempting a greeting. Her smile was thin, brittle at the edges. Andrew and I weren't informed. You didn't need to be, I replied. She blinked, just once, but the surprise was unmistakable. She had grown used to me cushioning everything I said. It must have felt strange to her now, hearing my voice without apology. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a tone meant to sound reasonable. Margaret, you're recovering from a serious episode. This isn't the time to make complicated decisions. You should be resting, not signing papers you may not fully understand. Her concern was a hollow cup, beautifully shaped, utterly empty. I understand them well enough, I said. That answer unsettled her. She crossed her arms. I just want to make sure you're not being pressured by hospital staff. They don't know our family. They don't know what's best for you. No, I agreed calmly. But they listen, and they respect my choices. Something flickered behind her expression. Irritation, quickly smoothed away. She softened her voice again. You know Andrew only wants to help. You know that, don't you? I studied her carefully. Do you? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. She drew a breath, steadying herself. This is unnecessary conflict, she said. If you had questions about your affairs, you could have come to us. We could have handled everything discreetly. Discreetly. Another word shaped to hide intent. Before I could answer, the door opened again. A nurse stepped in, tall, composed, one of the senior staff whose authority carried weight even Emma respected. Mrs. Holloway, the nurse said, addressing me directly, I'm here to confirm updates to your care access. I'll need just a moment. Emma moved toward her. I'm her daughter-in-law. You can speak to me as well. The nurse gave her a polite but immovable smile. I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mrs. Holloway has restricted access to approved contacts only. You are not listed. The stillness that followed was sharper than raised voices. Emma stared at the nurse, then at me, as though she couldn't quite comprehend the shift in power. I'm not listed? She repeated, trying to keep her voice even. No, the nurse said. Mrs. Holloway's directives are fully in place. Emma's face tightened, just for a heartbeat, but enough. The nurse finished her confirmation quickly, nodding to me with professional respect before leaving the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Emma exhaled, the sound small but sharp. So that's how it is, she said. You want to shut us out? No, I answered quietly. I want control of my own life. I've always supported you, she insisted, though her voice trembled with something closer to anger than hurt. Everything I've done was for your benefit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You told a doctor to let nature finish me. Her face drained of color, then flushed again. You weren't conscious. You misunderstood. I was emotional, worried about your suffering. I looked at her steadily. I heard you. Every word. For the first time since she'd entered my life, Emma had no immediate reply. She pressed her lips together, gathering what dignity she could, and reached for her handbag. Andrew will talk to you, she said at last, each syllable clipped. He'll know how to sort this out. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to sort. She left with her head high, but her steps were uneven, heels clicking too fast, too loud, like someone trying to outwalk the truth. When the room fell quiet again, I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. Not peace yet, but protection. And for now, that was enough. The morning of my discharge arrived quietly, without the dramatic weight I once imagined such a moment would hold. No final tests, no urgent warnings, just a nurse wheeling in a folded stack of papers for me to sign, her smile warm and unhurried. My body still felt tender in places, but it held me, and that was enough. Strength doesn't always return with noise. Sometimes it settles like a hand on your shoulder, steady and sure. Andrew arrived shortly after breakfast. He didn't knock. He walked in quickly, breath slightly short, as if he had rushed through the parking lot. His eyes darted to the packed bag waiting at the foot of my bed. "You're being discharged today?" he asked, forcing a bright tone. "Why didn't you call? I would have picked you up." "I didn't want to trouble you," I said. The softness in my voice was real, but the words were chosen. I watched the flicker of confusion cross his face. "Mom, it's no trouble. I already moved meetings around. Emma's waiting outside in the car. She found a good route home. We'll get you settled, heat the house properly, maybe even—" "I won't be going home with you," I said gently. He froze. Not dramatically, just completely. As if someone had pressed pause on him, his eyes searched my face for a misunderstanding that wasn't there. "What do you mean?" "I've made arrangements," I continued. "Transportation is coming shortly, and I won't be returning to the house." His mouth opened, then closed again. "Mom, you can't stay somewhere else. Not alone. You're recovering. It's not safe." Safe. The word felt different now. I had learned that safety didn't depend on proximity to family, but on the absence of people who believed your life ended before your pulse did. "I'll be staying somewhere that was my decision," I said. "Not yours. Not Emma's." He took a step toward me, his voice cracking. "Is this because of the forms? The conversations at the hospital? Emma didn't mean—" "She meant exactly what she said," I interrupted softly. "And so did you, Andrew, when you spoke of my home as if it were already yours to arrange." He swallowed hard, looking away for a breath before trying again. "I was worried. We both were." Concern can be genuine, I thought. But desire for control often wears its clothing. "Worry doesn't excuse taking choices away," I said, "or planning a future without someone who is still here." He sat heavily in the chair near the bed, running a hand through his hair, the way he did as a boy when he felt caught in something larger than he knew how to handle. "Mom, I don't understand why you're doing all this." "Because I heard you," I said simply. "I heard Emma. I saw the way decisions were being shaped around me, not with me." He closed his eyes. A quiet exhale left him, not quite guilt, not quite grief, something in between. Before he could gather another sentence, a knock interrupted us. A hospital aide stood at the door. "Mrs. Holloway, your transportation has arrived." Andrew turned toward the aide, stunned. "She didn't arrange anything with us," he said, as if that alone could halt the moment. "Arrangements were made directly with our office," the aide replied politely. I reached for my cardigan, the gray one folded neatly by the nurses, and slipped it over my shoulders. My hands didn't shake. They felt almost young. "Mom," Andrew said softly, "please, let us take you home. We can talk everything through." I looked at him, really looked, and felt the familiar ache of love mixed with disappointment. Not anger. Just the quiet truth that sometimes children drift into versions of themselves you no longer recognize. "I will always talk to you," I said. "But I won't go back to a place where my life was being planned without my consent." He stood slowly, defeated in a way I had never seen. "Where will you go?" "To a place I chose," I answered. "And that's all you need to know today." The aide helped me to my feet. My legs trembled slightly, but they held. Andrew watched me, expression caught between regret and something else, something like realization. I walked past him, each step a quiet reclaiming of myself. When I reached the doorway, I rested my hand briefly on the frame, not for balance, but for acknowledgement. "This isn't goodbye," I said, without turning back. "But things will not be the same." Then I stepped into the hall, leaving behind the room, the beeping machines, and the version of myself that once waited for others to choose her path. I felt lighter than I had in years, and though the journey ahead was uncertain, it was finally mine. The drive to the residence took about half an hour, though it felt shorter. Perhaps because I spent most of it looking out the window, letting the world pass gently by, unhurried for the first time in years. The landscape shifted from city streets to quieter roads lined with tall maples, their branches arching overhead like a softened crown. It felt appropriate, almost ceremonial, as if life itself was acknowledging the change. The car stopped in front of a building made of warm brick and glass. Modern, but not cold. It didn't resemble a facility or a place people were left behind. It looked, lived in, welcoming, a place built for choices, not endings. A woman greeted me at the entrance, introducing herself as Caroline, the community director. She didn't speak in that overly bright tone people reserve for the elderly. She spoke to me as though I were still entirely myself. That alone eased something in my chest. "We're glad to have you, Mrs. Holloway," she said. "Your room is ready. If at any point you want to change anything, layout, lighting, even the pillows, tell us. This is your space." Your space. How long had it been since I heard those words without suspicion attached to them? We walked together down a quiet corridor. Sunlight pooled on the floor where the windows stretched tall, and I could hear faint piano music from a common room nearby. Nothing loud, just a soft melody played by someone unafraid to touch the keys imperfectly. When Carolyn opened the door to my room, I stood still for a moment. It wasn't large, but it was bright. A soft armchair near the window. A small writing desk. Clean linens folded neatly at the end of the bed. A vase waited empty, ready for flowers I might choose myself. And for the first time since waking in the hospital, I felt a real exhale leave my lungs, slow and deep. "This is good," I said quietly. Caroline smiled. "You're free to rest, or walk around if you feel steady. Meals are served in the dining hall or delivered to your room. Your choice. My choice. Again." After she left, I sat in the armchair, pulling my cardigan closer around my shoulders. Outside the window, a few residents walked along the garden path, some slowly, some with surprising speed for their age. They moved with purpose, not confinement. No one hovered over them. No one ushered them along. They were allowed to exist without being directed. I let the quiet settle around me. Not the hollow kind that had filled my house after my husband died. This was a different quiet, shaped by freedom rather than absence. I thought of Andrew's face in the hospital room, stunned by the realization that his plans no longer anchored mine. I thought of Emma's sharp calm, the way she had clung to the idea of transition as if it were a kindness. For years, I had been the steady ground beneath all of them, smoothing every rough moment, absorbing every unspoken expectation. But somewhere along the way, the ground had shifted, and I had quietly disappeared behind their needs. Sitting here now, I felt myself return, not loudly, not triumphantly, but wholly. A staff member delivered a cup of tea, steam curling upward like a small ceremony. Chamomile, warm and fragrant. I cupped it in both hands, letting the heat seep into my palms, into the places of me that had been cold for too long. No one stood over me with forms. No one spoke of later, as if I weren't present now. No one hinted that rest was merely preparation for my exit. Here, rest meant something else. It meant I had arrived. I took a slow sip of tea and let the sunlight reach across the floor, inching quietly toward my feet. My life was not ending. It was simply, finally, my own again. The first week in the residence passed quietly, each day unfolding with a steadiness my life had lacked for years. I spent mornings walking the garden path, afternoons reading in the sunroom, evenings listening to the gentle murmur of conversations drifting from the dining hall. No tension, no clipped smiles, no footsteps pacing around me with hidden intentions. One afternoon, as I sat by the window with a book open on my lap, the receptionist knocked lightly on my door. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "your son is here to see you." I closed the book, marking my place with a finger. I had expected this visit eventually, but the reality still sent a small ripple through my chest. Not fear, just memory. There is a difference. Andrew entered slowly, without the hurried steps he used to carry everywhere. He looked older than I remembered from the hospital, less polished, more human, a man who had spent days thinking about things he had never wanted to examine. "Mom?" he said softly. "You look good." "I feel good," I replied. He glanced around the room, the armchair, the books, the vase now filled with flowers I'd chosen myself. A small nod formed, as if he recognized that this space belonged to me in a way my old house never had. "I'm sorry," he said, the words landing carefully, without theatrics. "About how things were handled, about what Emma said, about what I didn't say." I let the silence stretch. He needed it more than I did. He swallowed. "I didn't realize how much we were pushing you, or how it must have felt. I should have listened." I nodded. "Yes, you should have." He looked down at his hands, turning his wedding ring slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just want to understand how to do better." There was a time I would have rushed to comfort him, to soften the edges, to tell him he wasn't to blame. But life teaches you, eventually, that some truths must remain sharp if they are ever to protect you. "You can start," I said gently, "by seeing me as someone who still lives, not someone you're preparing to lose." His eyes lifted, wet but clear. "I see that now." I believed him, not fully, not blindly, but enough. "Your home," he said quietly, "will feel so empty without you." "It was empty long before I left," I answered. Not cruelly, simply true. He nodded again, slowly. "If you ever want me to visit, or help with anything, I will ask," I said. "If and when I choose." The words landed softly, but firmly. A new boundary. One he seemed ready to respect. He stood to leave, then hesitated. "I'm glad you're safe," he whispered. "So am I." After he left, I sat for a long moment in the quiet he left behind. It wasn't loneliness. It was space. Finally, mine. The sun dipped lower, spreading a warm amber glow across the floor. I watched it creep toward my chair, slow and patient, the way healing often is. I thought of the hospital bed, of Emma's voice telling the doctor to let nature finish me. I thought of the beeping monitor insisting I was still here. I thought of the papers I signed, the choices I reclaimed, the path I walked out of that building. Nature didn't finish me. It reminded me to begin again. And so I have begun. If you're reading this, whoever you are, wherever you are, remember this quiet truth. Your life is still yours. even when others believe they know better. Hold it gently, protect it fiercely. And if my story felt like a hand reaching toward yours, then let yours reach back. Share it. Tell someone who might need it.